I just want to go over in short the Gemara that we learned yesterday, which basically came to the same conclusion as the Gemara that we learned 2 days ago, and that is that we have 3 opinions regarding reciting prayers and needing to hear them. So when it comes to the Shema, the Mishnah said 2 views. It mentioned that a person needs to hear what they say when they say the Shema, and if a person didn't hear what they say, they fulfilled their obligation. Rabbi Yossi says you haven't fulfilled your obligation. So if a person did not hear themselves hear, they didn't say it loud enough to hear. So we have 2 views in the Mishnah. One is that you did fulfill your obligation. The other view is you didn't. And there's a 3rd view of Reb Meir that would be that you fulfilled your obligation, and you even can preferably say it in a very low tone that you don't even hear it, and that's fine to do in the first place. So there's 3 views. It's either permissible in the first place, it's permissible after the fact, or it is not acceptable and you have to redo it. That is the law with regard to Shema. Then we spoke about Truma. With regard to Truma, we had a view that if a person is deaf, they should not separate the Truma because they're not going to be able to hear the bracha that they're saying. And so instead they should maybe make an emissary to separate the Truma. And we said that view, the conclusion of the Gemara is that better a deaf person shouldn't do it. If they did it, it's okay. That would follow Rebbe Yehuda. That would follow Rebbe Yehuda's view that it's not preferable to do, but if you did it, it's okay. Then we spoke about Brochos hamazon, and we had a brisa that says a person should not say the Brochos hamazon if they don't hear themselves. But if they did, they fulfilled their obligation. Again, that will go like Reb Yehuda. And then we had a statement about a cheresh, a deaf person who separates truma, that he's allowed to do it in the first place, separate truma. That will go like Reb Meir. Reb Meir was the more lenient view. And we also said a statement, Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that if a person says Shema, they're supposed to hear it, what they say. And that view of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is, of course, Rabbi Yehuda. That fits with Rabbi Yehuda and his Rebbe, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that preferably you should hear it, but if you didn't, it's okay. Then we spoke about reading the Magilla. Is a deaf person allowed to read the Magilla? Yeah. And we said everyone is kosher to read the Magilla except a deaf person. So it implies that it was a little unclear what would be the law after the fact. In other words, is that person, is that acceptable? Is that saying that even after the fact they shouldn't read it or not? And so with regard to the Megillah, if we say that the Mishnah, that the Mishnah about Megillah is only preferable, but really after the fact it's okay, then that would fit with Reb Yehuda's. And I think that covers all of the cases. I think that covers all of the cases that we learned. We did mention something about a verse implying that Torah, we mentioned the verse, Haskes Ushma Yisrael. We tried to compare Shema to other mitzvahs, and we concluded that regarding other mitzvahs, everyone agrees that you're yaitza, other brachas, and then we asked the question of what about, it says Haskes Ushma, which implies you have to hear the words when you do other mitzvahs. And the Gemara answers that maybe that we could translate that verse to mean it's talking about Divrei Torah. at least the way this Gemara concludes, is that that verse is referring to Divrei Torah. For Divrei Torah, you're supposed to hear what you say, and that's where we ended yesterday. That which is a special law. Actually, I didn't emphasize it, but it's a special law that the question would be: if you're studying Torah and you're only thinking Torah, would you fulfill the mitzvah of Torah study? Would you need to make the blessing on the Torah that we make it recite in the morning? Let's say you're not ready to recite, you didn't say those blessings, and you get a phone call and someone starts asking you something, you want to think about a certain question in Torah, or your class started. You woke up exactly at 9:59 and Rabbi Smith is about to begin at 10 o'clock, and you didn't say you didn't say your Brochos. Then you listen to the class, and if you didn't say Brochos, and according to this Gemara, it implies that maybe if you're only thinking Divrei Torah, it would be you wouldn't need necessarily to say Brochos just for thinking Divrei Torah. I'm just going to pull up it says
okay.
Well, it's not the preferable way to do things. You should really wake up earlier, say Shema,
right,
and do the morning blessings. But I'm just going to pull up a Shulchan Aruch here and see what it clarifies with regard to. It says, a person who thinks about words of Torah doesn't have to recite a bracha. And there is a discussion about a person who writes words of Torah, because I guess when you're writing it, you're doing an action of Torah study. You might not be saying it, but you're doing an action of Torah study. And that's an interesting law. You would think it's only thought. You didn't say it, so it's only thought. But no, you're actually writing it. So some say that when you're writing it, and you're understanding what you're writing, so then that would be you would have to recite you have to recite the blessings. In any event, that would be the conclusion of the last Gemara. We're going to start now the next piece of Gemara. We're holding on page 15b, halfway down the page. If a person read the Shema and he didn't say the words with the correct dictum, he didn't recite the words clearly. Now, what did the Mishnah say? Let's remember what the Mishnah said. So the first case of the Mishnah was, you said Shema and you didn't hear yourself saying it. The second case of the Mishnah was that a person read the Shema, but he didn't say the words clearly with his lips. And we had an argument. Rabbi Yossi said he has fulfilled his obligation. Rabbi Yehuda said he has not fulfilled his obligation. So we mentioned earlier that means that the first case, Rabbi Yehuda was lenient, Rabbi Yossi was strict. The second case, Rabbi Yossi is lenient, Rabbi Yehuda is strict. So let's what the Gemara says. Amar Rab Hevi, Amar Rab Yoshi, halacha k'divrei shnehem lahakil. The halacha is like the words of both of these rabbis in their case of leniency, in their law of leniency, which means we follow the lenient view when it comes to hearing it with your ears. In the Mishnah, the lenient view was preferably you should hear it with your ears, but if you didn't, you fulfilled your obligation. We follow the lenient view with regard to saying the words clearly, that if you didn't say them clearly, you have still fulfilled your obligation, which is the view of Rabbi Yossi. So that's the halacha. Yes, David.
I had a question. There's the three garments of the soul: thought, speech, and action. So I'm assuming that everything has to fall into one: thought, speech, or action. So if a person is thinking Torah, that's thought. But once a person puts themselves where they're in a position where they're hearing Torah, is hearing considered thought, or is it more in the term of action? The person's making action in order to hear, and the Torah that's being taught, it seems like it would be more like action rather than thought.
You know what? I'm not sure. You're thinking that if you just think it yourself is one law, but if you're listening to someone else, maybe would be different. It wouldn't fall in that same category as thinking. Is that what you're saying?
Right.
Do you have any source for that?
No, I'm just thinking that a person who's thinking is actively doing something. When it says Shema Yisrael, Hashem is not telling you to think about it. He's asking you to make an action, to do an action. The action is to put yourself in a position to hear it and listen to it. So it seems like that's more like action rather than thought. It's not speech. So the question is it thought or action? So it seems like it's more like an action.
Well, let's not talk about a case where you're listening to someone else. Let's talk about a case where you're either just thinking a thought comes to your mind of Torah, or you are actually going to, really think deeply into a law of Torah. So according to you, it's like that's considered like haske sushma. You're attentively, like really thinking deeply into Torah. So you think that would be different than the law of maharher, just thought comes through your mind about Torah. That you don't have to say a bracha for, but you're thinking, but if you're like thinking deeply, you think you should say a bracha. Is that what you're thinking? Like you see a difference between those two?
Yeah, a little bit different. The thought is the person's putting themselves in a physical position to hear something, and they're making their ears available to hear something. That goes beyond thought. It's not speech. So it sounds like it's more like action. The person's taking themselves to shul to hear the commands.
I'm not sure if I see it that way. Although I do wonder when a person listens to Torah. So there is a concept of shemeya koina. Person hears is like he says it. So because of that, maybe you have a point. In other words, based on that reason, I'm not sure if I go for the other reason that you're putting yourself in a position. But the fact of shemeya koina, the fact that a person is listening to a shir, that's an interesting thought. Maybe that would be considered like he's saying it, to the extent that you should recite divrei, the bracha before that. I have to think about that. I'm not sure that that's correct, but it does sound like you might have a point there. So thank you for bringing that up. That is interesting.
Rabbi?
Miranda, yes.
I just
1 second. The mitzvah of blowing the shofar. The blowing the shofar bracha is
can
not.
hear me.
David, are you speaking to
It
me?
is open.
Yes.
Rabbi?
Okay, it was very unclear. You said something about blowing shofar.
Yeah. So the blessing that's made on the shofar blowing.
Oh yeah,
It's
to
not-
blow.
Not made on thinking about the shofar. It's made on the action of hearing the shofar. So it sounds like, for instance, what I'm saying
Well,
is,
no, it's
Yeah.
made on the. Okay, fine, right. Okay,
yeah.
I hear.
So it's-
Okay,
it's
interesting.
So what the bottom line is, what I'm saying is, if a person's thinking, I would think that maybe they do or they don't have to make a bracha on learning Torah. But if a person's attending a shir where they're doing the action of listening to you, they're putting themselves in an action position. It's not thought.
I hear. Okay, we got it, David. It's definitely an interesting thought. I would not have thought of it that way, and you have a nice source with your blessing on l'shmaya to hear kol shofar. Maybe there's a little thought there. I'll try to look into it. I'm not convinced, but it definitely is an interesting point that you're bringing up. Yes, Miranda.
According to some people, I've taken a whole course on listening years ago, and there's active listening and passive listening. So when you're listening to someone and you can kind of respond by repeating what they say or asking questions on what they say, that's active listening according to people.
Mhm.
And when you're just listening and it's okay, you hear it, sort of, it goes out, doesn't go anywhere, is passive. So I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I
Right.
just wanted to add that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
interesting. I don't know nowadays if there is such a thing as active listening. We don't have that anymore.
Rabbi,
We're in a different world today. Everything is just passive. We're on our phones the whole time. There's no such thing as active listening. They should take it out of the dictionary. Yes,
Rabbi,
yes, Phyllis.
going along with what Miranda said, it occurred to me, I haven't, learned this in a course or anything, but it seems to me that there's a distinction, like you have the two verbs. When you're just hearing something,
Right.
it's more passive. It's
Okay.
there.
Interesting.
Whereas when you're listening to something, there's mamash an action you're doing that where that could be the act of listening. In other words, you're
it could be
part of the process.
Again, Phyllis, we heard David, he developed his thought very nicely, and I see you follow that same logic. It's something I'll try to look into. I'm not convinced, but it sounds interesting. Yes, Ben.
I have to say active listening is when the Zoom is open on a shiur. If it's not open, it's not active listening.
If we could see the video, if the video is open, but then it's called active. If you close the video, interesting. Okay, very good. We're going to continue. The Gemara now says, Amar Rab Tevi, Amar Rab Yoshia, halacha. Okay, we said that. The next Gemara, 15b, about 20 lines from the bottom of the page. Amar Rab Tevi, Amar Rab Yoshia. Rab Tevi says, in the name of Rab Yoshia, my dechsiv, what does it mean in the verse? Shalosh heina lysis bena. These three are never satisfied. That there are three things that are never satisfied. Sha'oil, the grave, which va'itzer rechem, and the narrow of the womb. And the third thing is the earth. And these three things are never satisfied, which means that the ground always has space for more graves. The womb always has space for more sperm, and the earth always has space for more water. Can always take water. Now, so the Gemara is surprised that it puts the grave right next to the womb. Why does it put the two next to each other? Ella loymar lecha, to tell you, ma rechem machnes umoitzi, that just like the womb, it takes in seed and it gives off a baby, or it brings out a baby. Afsha oil, also the grave, machnes umoitzi, it takes in bodies, but it will take them out at the time of Techias HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. V'haloi dvarim kal v'chomer, and behold, this is a kal v'chomer, it is for sure, it is a method of being absolutely sure that this is so. Umar rechem, because just like the womb, shemachnisin by b'chashoy, that it's entered into the womb in quiet, in secrecy. Mimenu, it is taken out. When the baby comes out, it's taken out with great sounds, the great excitement. She'oil, the grave, shemachnisin by that it's entered into with great sounds of sadness and crying and eulogy. Einoi din, isn't it for sure? Isn't it logical? Shemaitzian mimeno, that it will be taken out from the grave, but koilais with great sounds, with great excitement when Mashiach comes. When the resurrection, when the Tchias HaMesim happens, right after the coming of Mashiach, or actually it says that for tzaddikim it even happens before the coming of Mashiach. So mikan shuva, from here there is an answer lo'imrim to those that say ein Tchias HaMesim in HaTorah, there is no source of the resurrection from the Torah, and here we have a source in the book of Mishlei, the book of Proverbs, that it says that it puts the grave next to the womb, implying, giving the implication that there is a similar idea that they will both be, that the grave will come out of the grave, the dead will come back to life with great excitement. So that's a interesting Talmudic explanation of a verse, and showing how we see Tchias HaMesim, we see the resurrection from that implication that it puts the grave next to the womb. Tani Rabbi Ishia, the next Gemara. Rabbi Ishia or Rabbi Yoshia learned, Tamei de Rava, in front of Rava. Uchsavtem, when it says uchsavtam, and you shall write them, what does it mean? Hakoil bechsav afilu tzava'os. When it says the word uchsavtam, which means that it should be written ksav in tam. Tam means complete. It should be written complete. Let me ask you a question. If I told you that I want you to write down the first 2 minutes of my class, I would like you to write it down. So, do you have to write down the words, I would like you to write down the first 2 minutes of my class, and the Talmud starts at it, or do I not need you to write the command part? I just want you to write the first 2 minutes of my class. So the Mishnah the Gemara here is dealing with this question. Hashem said, I want you to write it. Do you also have to write the sentence that says, I want you to write it? Or do you just have to write what Hashem wants us to write? So the word uchsavtam lo'is al yodecha, uchsavtam al mezuzos peisecho visharecha, you should write them on the doorpost of your house. Is that part of the Magilla, of the mezuzah? Excuse me. Should that be written as part of the mezuzah, or should you just write everything besides that? Because that is the command part. The command part is, I want you to write it on the doorpost. But you don't have to, maybe you don't have to write that I want you to write it on the doorpost. So the Gemara here says that it's interesting. It doesn't say v'kosav, you should write it. It says uchsav tam, you should write complete. What does it mean complete? So the Gemara says that's teaching you that you should write it with the command. I want you to write it, and I want you to write also the command that you should write it. So that's what the Gemara here says. Uchsavtam hakol b'ksav, everything should be written. Afilu tzavois, even the command part, you should write. And we do that. Our mezuzah has that you should write this as a sign, on the doorpost, on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. We write that in the mezuzah. The same thing as the tefillin. Ukshartam lo'is al yodecha vayu. We write the command part on the tefillin also. So this is what is hinted to in the word uchsavtam, that even the tzavos. Amar lei damar lachmani. So Rava said back to Rabbi Yoshia, who does this go like? Who would this, if someone tells you, who does this go like? Rabbi Yehuda, this goes like Rabbi Yehuda. The Amar Gabi Saita, because he says regarding the laws of the Saita is a woman who sinned by going into a private, secluded area with another man. She's a married woman and she goes to a secluded area with another man, and the law is, the thing is, we don't know if she actually had intercourse or not. So of course she sinned already, because being even secluded with another man is prohibited. But to what extent? That will not prohibit her from being with her husband if she committed that sin of being secluded. But if she committed intercourse with another man while she's married, she would be prohibited now from her husband. She deserves it, a very serious crime. It's a very serious crime, deserves a very serious punishment. So that she's called a saita. She has to drink certain water, and the water will testify if she sinned or not, and if she will explode if she actually had relations with this other man. Now, the Saita water, what is in the Saita water? In the Saita water is, there is ink, there is a little piece of parchment that was rubbed off into the water, and it's the laws of the Saita. The question is, what about the command to write this on the paper and dissolve this in the water? Is that also dissolved in the water? Or is it just the curses that it says about the woman that are dissolved? You have to also write the command part, the obligation, the commandment on the actual parchment. So there is an opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Olos kaisev, tzavos einoi kaisev." You don't write the command part; you only write the curse part. V'hasam hu dechsiv, and over there the reason is because it says v'kasav es ha'olos. You should write the curses. It doesn't say uchsavtam. It says v'kasav es ha'olos ha'ela. You should write these curses. So you only write the curses. Aval hacha, but here dechsiv uchsavtam. Afilu tzavos nami. Here it says uchsavtam. Even the tzavos, even the commands. Atu taime de Rabbi Yehuda. Is it the reason of Rabbi Yehuda mishum dechsiv v'kasav? Is it because it says v'kasav? Is that the reason why he says that you don't have to write the command? Taimei de Rabbi Yehuda mishum dechsiv olos. The reason of Rabbi Yehuda is not because it says v'kasav; it's because it says olos. So it's implying only the curses. Olos in tzavos lo. Don't write the commandment because it doesn't. It doesn't say. It specifically says olos. It doesn't just say write it. It says write the curses. So it implies only the curses. So the Gemara answer is itztrich. We need it. Salka daitoch amina. I would have thought neilaf ksiva mehasam, that we would learn the fact that over there it says v'kasav and here it says v'chsavtam, that we would learn one from the other, and that just like over there it says just write the curses. Ma hasam olos in tzavois loy. I would think here also, tzavois loy, you don't have to write the command. So kasav rachmano uchsavtam. So the Torah says uchsavtam afilu tzavois, even the commands you have to write uchsavtam, even the sentence that says you should write it on the doorposts of your house. That command, that sentence you should also write, because otherwise we would have understood. We would have learned one from the other, and therefore it says by the mezuzah uchsavtam to tell you should write the command as well. So that's this statement. It's, I guess, learned here because we're talking about reading the Shema, or it's because Rabbi Yoshia was the last Gemara here. Also, we're continuing with Rabbi Yoshia, or because it's talking about the Shema. It's one of the sentences in the Shema. Maybe that's another connection here, why it's mentioning it. Okay, we're going to have to conclude. Went over time. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to